Welcome to Mild Moodcast, a podcast meant to explore mental health through the lens of another human hanging on by a thread. I'm Bianca, a registered mental health counselor intern, soon to be LMHC, here to chat about the topics we don't get enough of. So grab your headphones and let's dive into the crazy world of mental health. It's going to be a wild ride. Hi guys! Happy Sunday, or whatever day it is that you're listening to this. Happy day. Today's episode is called Letting Go of Ego, Embracing Vulnerability and Change. I figured that this was going to be a good way to wrap up the men's mental health series. Who knows, I may revisit it in the future, but at least for right now, this was my last planned episode, kind of specific to men. So let's talk about for a second why we cling to control. My first instinct when thinking about this topic was to talk about how we as people struggle with control. But the more I sat with it, I realized this is really about the ego. The ego isn't some villain that we need to destroy. It's the part of us that's built to keep us safe. It steps in to protect us when we feel vulnerable, exposed, or uncertain. But the problem is that the ego doesn't know how to differentiate between actual danger and emotional discomfort. So in turn, it treats all vulnerability as a threat. And that's how we end up closing ourselves off. From love, from change, from our own emotions. The biggest lie the ego tells us is that control equals safety. But real safety isn't about control. It's about trust. In this episode, we're going deep. And yeah, that's what she said. But we're going to explore how ego keeps us locked in old patterns, how to start letting go, and how to allow ourselves to be open and receptive to change, to love, and to the full range of human emotion. Quick disclaimer. As always, while my podcast is meant to spark reflection and curiosity, it is not a replacement for therapy. If you're navigating heavy emotions or challenges, please reach out to a professional. Therapy is a safe space to process and grow. So let's start by understanding the ego's role in emotional guarding. Let's break it down. What is the ego really? The ego is the part of you that creates your identity. It's not just arrogance or pride. It's a sense of who you are. That means the ego is not bad. It's not something to kill or destroy. The goal isn't to become egoless. It's to make sure the ego isn't running your life. The problem is that the ego operates from a place of protection, which often means avoidance, control, or shutting down. When it comes to emotions, the ego's job is to maintain the image of strength, stability, and certainty. If an emotion threatens that, the ego tries to suppress it. So what does this look like for many men? Intellectualizing emotions instead of actually feeling them. Over-explaining feelings rather than sitting with them. Denying emotions entirely, telling yourself you're fine even when you are very clearly not. Distracting yourself with work, logic, or numbing behaviors like alcohol, social media, or constant productivity. Letting go of ego doesn't mean being passive. It means allowing yourself to experience emotions fully without needing to control or justify them. How does ego shape our relationship with vulnerability? Well, the ego fears what it can't predict or control. And vulnerability is the ultimate unknown. Vulnerability isn't just about opening up to others. It's about being real with yourself first. But what's ironic is we all crave deep, meaningful connections. but we build walls that keep us from actually experiencing them. So here's a good question to ask yourself. What am I afraid will happen if I let my guard down? And it's amazing because obviously each of these topics is like a continuation of the topic from before. But I really like this one because it's more targeted and it's kind of a little bit of a call out. It's an important call out though. Many men are conditioned to see vulnerability as a weakness, but let's flip that. Vulnerability is actually about strength, which I have said before, but it's the willingness to be seen, to express, and to engage fully with life. That takes more courage than avoidance ever will. So when we're resistant, how do I know if it's showing up? When someone asks you how you're feeling, do you brush it off or give a surface level answer? When something deeply affects you, do you let yourself process it or do you distract yourself? When you feel hurt, do you acknowledge it or do you try to rationalize it away? It's a very typical thing for people to see each other in passing and they go, "Hey, you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm doing well." Are you? Or is it just easier to say that because you don't feel like talking about it in the moment because you don't feel like the person you're talking to is going to particularly care? And sometimes you do it with your friends, the people who genuinely would care and would want to know. But it's just easier to give that surface level answer. Before you can be vulnerable with others, though, you have to practice. And yes, I say practice, being open with yourself. How can you expect to tell other people what's going on when you don't even really know? When you won't admit certain things to yourself? So what do you do? Well, it's not that you have to talk out loud and have these conversations, which granted, honestly, 10 out of 10 recommend. Sometimes even by saying things out loud to yourself, you're still processing. You're recognizing things. But a journal is one of the most powerful tools for ego work because it forces honesty. When you write, notice when you start editing your emotions. The goal is not to write what sounds reasonable or logical. It's to write what's true. Now, before I go into further talking about common ego traps in journaling, how you can point it out, I remember when I first started journaling, I was terrified. Now, mind you, I've been journaling my entire life on and off, and I actually have had back when you called them diaries. I've had diaries read. I've had diaries read by classmates. I've had diaries read by a multitude of people, and it always felt like this major invasion of privacy. So I understand that as an adult, maybe you've had a similar experience. You wrote something down or you even told someone and they told other people. Something really important, something you didn't want to share with the world, got out to someone else. So when I first had a conversation with my therapist about needing to journal, she was like, "Bianca, you gotta write this stuff down." I was like, "I want to, but I'm just afraid that someone's gonna pick it up and read it." And she said, "Is there anyone in your household that's gonna pick it up and read it?" I said, "Well, no, my privacy is, respected here." And she said, "Okay, then what is it that you think you're afraid of?" And obviously it was the vulnerability. It was not only when I'm writing, I know that I have to be honest with myself. But she did give me a tip. For those of you who might be living with someone and feel like you don't want anyone else to see your words, my therapist had a client who took black construction paper and she would glue it to the pages when she was done writing. Now, personally, that doesn't work for me because I love to revisit what I write about. But for other people, they just flat out don't feel safe and they need the ability to get it out. So you might want to consider getting yourself some black construction paper, and it can't be seen, but at least you would have spent the time on the emotions and the feelings in that journal. So let's talk about some common ego traps. Trying to explain emotions instead of actually feeling them. When I see a lot, writing as if someone else is reading it. That means you're filtering. I have clients all the time who they'll start to say something about someone in their life and they go, well, they're not. And they kind of go back. And I'm like, it is literally just us here. You don't have to filter. We tend to want to filter our thoughts in the way that we feel, and that's totally natural. But when we stop filtering, now we're not avoiding uncomfortable truths. One way that we avoid uncomfortable truths is by shifting the focus. So not only am I struggling to write things down, I'm avoiding writing them down and going to a completely different topic. There's nothing wrong with being all over the place with your writing. There's nothing wrong with being able to get it all out. But if you're just writing what you think you should be writing, it's not going to help. You have to be able to pour your heart out onto that page. Some good journaling prompts to help break past those barriers. What emotions do I avoid the most? Why? What would happen if I allowed myself to fully experience my feelings without trying to control them? What am I holding on to that I know I need to release? So let's talk therapy and letting go of the ego's need to perform. A lot of men struggle with therapy not because they don't want help, but because it forces them to be real in ways they've never practiced. Running that back, in ways they've never practiced. And it's like I have this fear of change because I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't like not having the upper hand. I've never done this before. I don't know how it's going to go. The ego thrives on performance. In therapy, so many people feel the need to say the right thing or prove they're making progress. But therapy isn't about having the answers. It's about sitting with the questions. So the moment you can stop trying to do therapy correctly and start showing up authentically, that's when the real work begins. I mean, really, ask yourself, what good would it be to talk about anything and everything that's not true or that's not truly affecting you? I've said this before, it's like when I start to tell my clients to look at the feelings wheel and get comfortable with their emotions, they usually go for the positive. And that is what people do. Oh, well, I really haven't had an eventful week. It was fine. I worked. I saw my family. I did a couple things. And what about when no one was looking? How were you feeling when you were sitting in bed late at night? Did your emotions take over? Did they feel overwhelming? Was there a time when you couldn't stop your thoughts? The moment we stop trying to do things correctly is when the real work begins. Because then we're not afraid to touch those things. Let's talk about love, ego, and the fear of surrender. You know, love is one of the biggest areas where ego creates roadblocks. And your initial instinct when I said love earlier and just now might have been like, oh, I don't want to talk about this topic. I don't want to talk about this subject. And that's exactly the point. This is one of the biggest areas where ego is going to say, this is not going to pass, because it wants to protect you from pain. But in doing so, it often shuts out love entirely. You know, I recognize that people have had life experiences that have just outright burnt them. And it can be terrifying to want to open yourself up to the chance of that happening again. But if we could just shift the perspective for a moment and recognize that it's trying to get you to shut out love entirely. Of course, it's scary. A lot of things are scary. Learning to ride your bike for the first time is scary. Having to go from middle to high school is scary. Having to go and get a job for the first time is scary. Have you ever had a bad job? Have you ever had a really terrible boss that didn't respect you? That made you hate going to work every day? That really burnt you out? Did you get another job afterwards? Did you potentially leave? Have you ever had a friend hurt your feelings? Maybe repeatedly. Maybe they didn't respect you. But it didn't stop you from having friends. So why is it that we see love as the one thing we can't let into our lives? Because we're trying to protect ourselves from pain. You know, like many things, love requires surrender. You can't micromanage intimacy. You can't control how someone will respond to you. And I want you to really think about that. You can't control how someone will respond to you. The only thing you have control over is how you respond to them. Someone says something to you, and it can initially cause a visceral reaction, honestly. But allowing for that surrender to occur means learning different reactions. So here's a couple signs that the ego is blocking love. You struggle to express affection openly. You hesitate to say how you truly feel because you don't want to seem like too much. And honestly, what is too much in the right hands? You keep people at a distance because what if they hurt me? You find yourself sabotaging relationships when they start feeling too real. We also have to recognize, and hopefully, as you've listened to this, you may be working to identify your own patterns. A lot of times we have this perception that everyone is the same. And the hard part, the tough pill to swallow, is that we all have patterns. And what do I mean by that? You know, they say like women never like the men who are kind. They only like the bad boys. They only like the men who treat them like shit. It's a pattern. So women may see and think that all men are the same, and men may see and think that all women are the same. And that's because they are attracting the same types of people into their energy. If you are the type of person that sabotages relationships when they start to feel too real, that potentially means that you are starting connection and communication with someone that's like healthier for you or healthy for you in general. And because it feels too good, too much, I might get hurt. Fear comes in. And what does it do? It pushes you to your old habits and your old behaviors, which means you're likely going to seek out another person who isn't going to force that change out of you. Because here's the interesting part about people who are not inside of your pattern. They're going to call you out on the things that are your pattern. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, not call you out in a way that makes you feel disrespected. They're just going to say, hey, I'm noticing this and it's not cool. And when we're not ready to change, we're going to fight it. It's so much easier in general to live your life unchecked, to surround yourself by people who are not going to turn a mirror back on you. Because when there's no mirror, there's no real work. I don't have to change. I can continue in the same patterns, in the same ways, with the same behaviors forever. But honestly, that's no life to live. We sabotage things as people that are better for us because of ego, because of fear of vulnerability. Thinking to myself, what if they hurt me? And again, I say you can't control how someone will respond to you. But shutting down everything doesn't lead to growth. It leads to being stuck. Pausing for a second. If the episode is resonating with you, take a second to like, share, or leave a rating, depending on where you're listening. It helps get these conversations to more people who might need them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too. If there's something in this episode that stood out to you, drop a comment or a review. Your perspective might help someone else. They might connect with something in a new way. Let's shift for a moment to how ego blocks personal growth and change. On this same topic, right? So a lot of men say that they want growth, but what they actually want is growth without discomfort. The ego will forever resist change because change is unpredictable. But staying where you are just because it's comfortable isn't growth. It's stagnation. Now, again, not a man, but I love me a good personal story moment. I am a person who significantly struggled with control. And I may have said this before. I'm sure I said this before. In fact, in my first episode, I always had a 5-year plan. I always knew what direction my life was headed in. I had to. You were not about to tell me that I was going to be uninformed. And then I started to see my needs differently. I started to see that I really needed to control these things in order to feel safe. But it wasn't about safety. It was about ego. Because there is safety in surrender. It's knowing that I'm still going to get up every day and do all of the things that make me happy. I'm still going to work. I'm still going to make money. And I'm going to trust the process. I'm going to sit back. I'm not going to be resistant to change. And for the first time in my life, go with the flow. See what happens, because my focus isn't, I have to stay on this straight line. It's, I have to make sure that I'm always taking care of me. And I had to redefine what it meant to take care of me. I thought I did things I liked to do. I thought it was always important to throw myself into work. I'm still a hard worker. That hasn't changed. But my headspace has changed. I found that I'm more creative. I'm happier. I mean, who the hell doesn't like to be filled with joy? It's amazing what happens when you let go. So ask yourself, where in my life am I resisting change out of fear? How would my life be different if I stopped trying to control everything? And be careful with this question too, because I'm not trying to send you on a spiral. I don't want you to look back and think of all of the what ifs and cement yourself further into the fear of moving forward with something new. I want you to encourage and comfort the parts of you that you may have ignored out of fear. And think, what would happen if I allowed myself to trust the process instead of fighting it? Control feels like safety, but real safety comes from trusting yourself to handle whatever emotions arise. You don't have to fight your ego. Just recognize when it's running the show. Letting go doesn't mean losing yourself. It means making space for more of yourself. Vulnerability isn't a loss of power. It's where real power begins. I would encourage you to ask today, am I willing to let go of my need to control long enough to experience something real? Thanks for listening today, guys. I hope that you're able to take the space that you need to really recognize if ego is standing in your way today. Can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to Mild Moodcast. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. If you have any burning questions or topics you'd like me to cover, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on YouTube at Mild Moodcast and Instagram at Mild Mood Therapy. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to explore the wonderful world of mental health together. Until next time, stay curious and keep smiling.